Good evening. Tonight we can show you the terrifying moment two gunmen opened fire inside a busy Auburn kebab shop during the lunchtime rush yesterday.
Bullets tear through a crowded kebab shop. Sydney's most hunted gang leader drops, and so do two innocent bystanders. It's the fourth hit attempt in 5 months, and he's still breathing. The floor is slick with spilled drinks and blood. Shards of glass crunch under the boots of first responders. Outside, traffic has frozen. Drivers staring through windshields at a scene they'll be replaying in their heads for days. The shooter is gone. No name, no face. Just the sound of an engine fading into the streets of Auburn. For most people, surviving a daylight ambush like this would be a miracle. For Samim Janazari, it's just another entry in a growing list of close calls. Because this war didn't start in a kebab shop. It started years earlier, in the backstreets of Sydney's west, where a group of young men would rise from school football fields to the deadliest role in the city's underworld, and then turn on the very people who made them. Missed the button? Go ahead. Subscribe now so you don't forget later. In the heart of Western Sydney, where ambition and violence intertwine, a new breed of enforcers is rising. The Kyditi family, or KVT, once shadows in the city's underworld, have emerged as formidable players. But their ascent isn't just about power. It's about betrayal. Joseph Vokai, known as Joe Fresh, isn't just a name. He's a symbol of KVT's evolution. From humble beginnings, Vokai has steered the crew from petty street dealings to orchestrating high-stakes operations. But ambition has its price. The Alamadine crime network, led by Rafat Alamadine, once saw potential in KVT. They were the muscle, the ones who handled the dirty work. Together, they dominated Sydney's underworld, their influence stretching far and wide. But as the saying goes, power corrupts. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. KVT, once the loyal enforcers, began to question their position. They weren't just soldiers, they were becoming kings. A split was inevitable. Vokai and his inner circle began to distance themselves from Alamadine's influence. They sought independence, freedom from the chains that once bound them. But in the world of organized crime, betrayal is a dangerous game. The streets of Sydney erupted. What was once a partnership turned into a bloody feud. KVT and Alamadine's factions clashed, each vying for control, each unwilling to back down. Task Force Falcon was established, a coalition of over 150 officers, to quell the rising violence. But the question remains, who can be trusted? In a world where allegiances shift like sand, even the police find themselves questioning their sources. In the underworld, trust is a luxury few can afford. And as the war between KVT and Alamadine intensifies, one thing is certain: the city will never be the same. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the heart of Sydney's gangland war. What drives men to betray their own? And who will emerge victorious in this deadly game of power and revenge? Masood Zakaria leveraged his influence in Sydney's junior rugby league to transform a handful of street youths into a disciplined armed strike team. By funding junior football clubs and cultivating trust among talented young players, he identified the ones with ambition, loyalty, and a ruthless streak. These recruits would become the backbone of KVT, learning discipline on the field and carrying it into the streets, where the stakes were far deadlier. The training wasn't just physical. Zakaria instilled a mindset of obedience, loyalty, and intimidation. Every drill, every match, every handshake was a lesson in hierarchy and fear. KVT's reputation as enforcers of the Alamadine crime network grew not from sheer numbers alone, but from their precision, efficiency, and the quiet terror they inspired. By 2021, their notoriety had reached a new height. A plot to assassinate Ibrahim Hamzy, the leader of the Hamzy crime family, was discovered and foiled by police. 2 armed men in a stolen vehicle had planned to execute the hit, targeting the apex of Sydney's underworld. Among the individuals charged were Samuel John Rokomakisa and Joseph Joe Fresh Vokai, already recognized as the leader of KVT. The gang's involvement in such a high-profile attempt showcased both their audacity and their role as muscle behind the Alamadine network. But the foiled plot also revealed cracks. KVT was no longer just a loyal crew executing orders. They were a force with its own ambitions, capable of taking calculated risks that even their mentors hadn't fully anticipated. Loyalty in the underworld is never absolute, and every decision carried a psychological toll. This raises the larger question: why would a group so tightly controlled, so systematically trained, eventually turn their guns on the very men who elevated them? The answer lies in ambition, betrayal, and the volatile nature of power. KVT's rise demonstrates how easily loyalty can fracture when opportunity, resentment, and the desire for independence collide. Quick reminder: if you're still watching, stay with us as we dive into the next chapter, where the battle lines are drawn and Sydney's underworld begins to implode from within. By 2025, the landscape of Sydney's underworld had shifted dramatically. Key leaders of the Alamadine crime network fled the city, reportedly seeking refuge in Lebanon. Their absence left a void that no one could ignore, a vacuum into which ambition and fear rushed. KVT seized the moment, claiming independence from their former mentors. But power breeds ambition, and ambition breeds division. From within KVT, a younger, more volatile faction emerged: the Afghani Crew. Unpredictable and ruthlessly violent, they pushed the limits of brutality. Every street corner, every nightclub, every quiet suburban lane became a potential battlefield. The city's streets began to mirror the chaos inside the gangs. Drive-by shootings shattered the calm of midday. Arsons consumed businesses that had stood for decades. Daylight shootings left witnesses frozen in terror, some too afraid to speak, others forever scarred by what they saw. The violence was no longer contained. It was everywhere, creeping into the lives of those who thought Sydney was safe. The fracture wasn't just structural, it was psychological. Trust became a rare commodity. Loyalty shifted overnight. Even seasoned KVT members questioned who could be counted on. The Afghani Crew thrived in this uncertainty, their audacity a dangerous echo of the discipline that once held KVT together. Every interaction became a potential betrayal. Every glance could conceal a gun. But the most pressing question remains: what was the strike? The single act of aggression that ignited this simmering tension into an all-out war. One move, one miscalculation, would send shockwaves across Sydney, and no one would remain untouched. The simmering violence in Sydney's underworld spilled into the streets, claiming lives that had no connection to the war. Innocent people became collateral damage, their futures stolen in seconds. 23-year-old John Versace was gunned down in a case of mistaken identity. A life full of plans, of laughter and ambition, ended on a quiet street corner. Witnesses would later recount the chaos, the sound of bullets, the screams, the sudden silence. Aspiring footballer Khalil Taisani's dreams were shattered in another ambush. A single bullet left him paralyzed, his future in sports erased in an instant. Friends and teammates were left grappling with grief and anger. How could someone aiming for power bring so much destruction to innocent lives? Shop worker Urgul Idogu fell into a coma during a daylight attack on a commercial street. She had only been at work, performing her daily routine, when the war claimed her body and trapped her between life and death. Every passerby felt the weight of fear in a city where bullets could strike anyone. Families mourned in silence, but the heartbreak was amplified by the legal system. When suspects were granted bail, outrage rippled through the community. Trust in justice faltered as the public questioned whether Sydney's authorities could ever tame the chaos. Every street, every corner, every neighborhood bore the scars of this conflict. Ordinary citizens were forced to confront a city reshaped by betrayal, ambition, and unrestrained violence. Who could feel safe? Who would be next? You're still here? Do what you meant to do earlier. Subscribe. Sydney had been in a state of constant tension for months, its streets pulsing with violence that seemed to have no clear beginning. Police intelligence, however, revealed a truth that few could have anticipated. The gangland war was not the result of random ambition. It had a single catastrophic catalyst. KVT and the Afghani Crew had tried to negotiate a power-sharing arrangement, a precarious truce to divide control over territory, rackets, and influence. On paper, it seemed like a possible resolution. In reality, it was a trap waiting to snap. Ambition, mistrust, and deep-seated rivalries ensured that the deal would collapse. The negotiations did not just fail, they detonated a chain reaction that left blood on the streets and fear in every neighborhood. Samimjan Azari, one of KVT's most prominent figures, survived 4 assassination attempts in 2025 alone. Each attempt was meticulously orchestrated, revealing a level of planning that bordered on obsession. Snipers, drive-by shooters, and improvised ambushes were all aimed at eliminating him, yet each failed. The repeated targeting highlighted a cruel reality. In this war, even the most skilled and loyal could become targets in an instant. The violence that had once seemed scattered, daylight shootings, arsons, and street-level assaults, was now understood as part of a single, connected network of shooters operating across Sydney. Each incident was calculated, each strike was a message. The deaths of John Versace, the paralysis of Khalil Taisani, and the coma of Urgul Idogu were not random tragedies. They were collateral damage, consequences of a meticulously executed war that used fear as its weapon. The psychological toll on the city was immense. Ordinary citizens lived in fear, constantly questioning who could be trusted, who was an ally, and who was a target. Families of the victims struggled with grief and outrage, while law enforcement raced to map the sprawling web of violence. Every arson, every shooting, every attempted assassination was a thread in a tapestry woven from ambition, betrayal, and blood. The Ironside reveal was undeniable. Loyalty had been shattered, ambition had turned lethal, and a single failed deal had transformed Sydney into a city where survival was never guaranteed. Those who had once stood side by side now hunted each other with cold precision. Task Force Falcon struck hard. Dozens of arrests were made, spanning the breadth of Sydney's underworld. Even teenagers as young as 15 were swept up in the dragnet, young lives already entangled in a war they could scarcely understand. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the chaos might finally be contained. The violence slowed, streets that had trembled under gunfire now quieted. Shops reopened, communities exhaled, and residents dared to hope. But the war was far from over. The leaders of both KVT and the Afghani Crew remained at large, shadowy figures whose movements were as unpredictable as their ambitions. Their absence from custody was a reminder that power and vengeance were still very much alive, waiting for the next opportunity. Investigators pieced together the carnage of the past months, the shootings, the arsons, the foiled assassination attempts. The threads led not just to rivalries, but to fractures within the gangs themselves. And that was the most dangerous realization of all. In a city so saturated with betrayal, the next act of violence might not come from a rival, but from inside. Sydney's most volatile gang war had slowed, but the tension remained, hanging like a blade over every street. Every decision, every move, every handshake carried the weight of deadly consequences. One wrong step could ignite a fire that no task force could contain. What comes next? Will the cycle of violence finally end through arrests, a fragile truce, or something far bloodier? Police can only speculate, but the people of Sydney live each day under the shadow of that question. What do you think will end Sydney's most volatile gang war? Arrests, truce, or something bloodier? Drop your theory below.